welcome, everybody, to 2024 and our first episode of the year. I am so excited to have with me Will Taylor, who is the head of partnerships at nearbound.com, and now also, since this week, the head of nearbound partnerships at Reveal. And this show was inspired by like a LinkedIn post that Will made a while ago about the first 90 days in their new role. And I'm so excited to catch you today, Will, because you just started a new role. So this is like very timely for you as well. And I'm really pumped to talk about what to expect when you enter a new partnership role.
Yeah, I think this is the most important thing that people should be thinking about, you know, if they're making new hires, joining a new company and so on. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Nice. And if you are tuning in live today, make sure to let us know where you're tuning in from. And also, if you have questions for Will, drop them in the chat and we'll show them on screen, just how we showed that comment right now. And so without further ado, let's dive in. I think it's always really important to start with the end in mind. So what I would love for you to just share with us is, what's the end goal? Like, what does good look like after your 90 days, or maybe after the first year, if you want to take it a little bit further? Like, what are we working towards in these initial steps?
Yeah, I would say the goal for the first 90 days is for you to become the Jack or Jill of all things your company. And so you shouldn't be, 100% perfect in everything from, the sales pitch to the demo to understanding the lay of the business. Save that for the experts in your team, but you should be moderately proficient at each one so that when you are starting conversations with partners, whether they are net new or existing relationships, that you can competently speak to the business's strengths and weaknesses. So that's the primary goal of the first 90 days, is to become 70% proficient in as much as you can. And we'll be getting into, of course, like how you can do that. But the thing that you don't want to do is just dive in and try and apply everything that you've learned from previous companies, because what I've learned is that in partnerships, there are so many nuances across partner types, across business types, across industries. And obviously the fundamentals will still apply, but there are definitely going to be a lot of intricacies for your specific business. And, how can you actually provide value for the end client if you truly don't understand the business, what's valuable to you, what's valuable to the partner and the client as well. So that's where I would say, don't rush into it thinking you can do everything. You need to become proficient across the entire business, whether it's product, sales, marketing, and so on and so forth. That'll give you the really the best base possible. And as we continue to talk about this, it'll give you good relationships that you can tap into later as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's so interesting, right? Because like the assumption would be that as the head of partnerships in a new company, your initial job is to talk to all the partners, right? Or like everybody who is in the partner ecosystem. But it seems like there's actually a step before that, right? They're like the people in the company that you have to talk to, your customers, and then also the partners at some point as well. But it's actually probably more important that you know what you're starting from rather than going straight to the partners, which might confuse, what your value proposition is, etc.
Exactly. When I think about, Mary, good to see you.
Oh, I just want to give a shout out to Mary, who joined us live from Ontario, Canada. You're like right in Will's neighborhood.
That's right, just down the road from me. Regarding your point, Franz, about you mentioned, understanding the client value, the partner value, and so on. It brings me back to when organizations need to build an ideal partner profile. You truly need to understand what's the value for the client in the partnership type, what's the value for the partner in that partnership type, and then of course your business. Because if you step in and you're like, okay, I'm just going to go 100% with all these things right now, and you haven't done the groundwork first, then you'll only focus on what is going to be measured, which is likely going to be source revenue or pipeline generated. And that's not going to generate value for the end client. And, maybe you'll have some initial success and momentum, but that's not sustainable. You need to truly understand the business and the value across the business for everyone involved. So, that note that you mentioned of client value, partner value, and then your value, take some time. And I would say 90 days is a good time to do it.
I absolutely love that because I feel like revenue is often confused for what it is. Like ideally, you create value for the customer and then you capture some of that value, right? If you generate like $1 million value for a customer, it's value like it's valid for them to pay you $100,000 for your software because they generate 1 million worth of value for their company as a result of that, right? So you shouldn't confuse like, just focusing on your revenue number with actually creating value for customers because if you create value, you're going to be able to capture it somehow as well.
Exactly. That'll lead to upsells, to retention. And as we know, partnerships is not just revenue generation, it is revenue retention, and the overall life cycle and longevity of the client is impacted by it. So that's why laying that groundwork first and really sinking your teeth into every part of the business is going to get you there faster.
Nice. All right. Well, then let's take it like week by week and start with like the initial weeks. Like you're a new company, you join as Will Taylor, head of partnerships at new company. Who are the first people you talk to? Like what are your first actions you do on your first day? Assuming that there's, company onboarding, you've kind of done that already, like that basic onboarding.
Yeah, I would get on sales calls as soon as possible. You need to have a really good relationship with your sales team, because they're going to be the ones that are going to ultimately help you hit your number in some fashion. And so, one, you can develop relationships, but two, you're going to hear right from the prospective customers themselves the challenges they're facing, the words that they're using. And it's also going to be a higher stakes situation than, let's say, a CSM call with an existing client where maybe it's just these regular updates and talking about product updates. That's still valuable, but the curiosity and the questions that you'll be able to experience on a sales call is going to be much more valuable, because then you can follow up with that seller, continue to develop a relationship with them, and then ask, why did you ask this question? Why is this important? The discovery phase of the sales process is in my opinion, the most robust phase to really understand what clients and prospective clients are going through. So I would sit on as many sales calls as possible. And with that, if you are not on sales calls and you've already done the company onboarding, then I would be networking internally as much as possible. So, in the first few weeks, I would be setting meetings with each of the heads of each department. And I would be very intentional in those conversations to ask what they care about, what are they held responsible for, how they think partnerships are going to help. And if they don't know, then use that time to educate them and really set the relationship off on the right foot, saying, I'm going to help you with XYZ goals that you just told me are important to you. Reason for that, again, is because you need those relationships or else you're going to be doing everything yourself. So if you don't want to do everything yourself and get so overwhelmed that you're overworked, like a lot of partner managers do, then I would develop relationships very early, and that would be in the first few weeks.
Yeah. I think there's a really important insight in there as well, like talking to the heads of the departments. Like partnerships probably has to be a relatively senior role. You can't have somebody who's like a BDR level partnerships manager at a company with like a couple hundred people, because that person might be too scared to talk to all the heads of the different departments, right? And that means that they might not actually have the buy-in and insights, etc., that they need in order to do their job well. Versus somebody who is more senior and part of the leadership team or part of the at least senior team in the company might actually be able to have these meetings, right? Or do you see it differently?
So I do agree with you. That's the ideal situation. Let's say someone did get hired into a partnerships position and they were, a BDR before. I would say that role, the BDR role, has a really good opportunity because, if you've done it for a year or two, you probably are really good at asking questions and having conversations with people that, may be above your your pay grade or maybe more senior than you, and you're still able to face those uncomfortable situations. So I mean, ideally you would have that seniority experience, but if you are coming from the background of sales and doing outbound or inbound prospecting, then leverage those skills. And this is where I love talking about the transferable skills from especially sales into partnerships. And one of those main things is the ability to ask the right questions and to be curious so that you're able to influence people as you see fit, for making sure that, again, you're situated in the best position possible in the organization. So I would venture to say that, yes, better to have the seniority, but I would not be discouraged if I was a BDR, because those skills are lifelong skills, I will say.
Yeah, I like that. And if you're not a leadership member yet, like, you should probably just aim to become a leadership team member, which means that you should treat yourself as such. So don't be afraid to reach out to the VPs, etc., in your business, and just see, right? Like, if you don't ask, nothing will happen. So you should get their ear as early as possible and make sure that they see that partnerships is something your company is taking serious, and then also report back, because people want to see that progress, right? Because some of them might not be, as bought into partnerships, or might have like scar tissue from like previous companies where it didn't work out. So it's important to get on their radar right away, and like also understand like what their concerns are, etc.
Absolutely agree.
I really like your point about sitting in on customer calls. Like, what are your thoughts around like companies which use tools like Gong? Like, should you use a tool like Gong and just listen on to all the recordings of customer calls, or do you think there is value on sitting in on the actual call?
So sitting in on a live call, in my opinion, gets you to really focus in, because especially if you're on camera and you're on your phone or something, it's obvious, people will see it, and it won't look that great for especially a prospect. And so that will keep you accountable, keep you present, and focus in on the specifics that they're talking about, versus, a Gong recording, you can kind of put it on in the background, which there's basically less incentive for you to pay attention. Like, obviously you should be, but there's no like social dynamic, there's no social politeness that is required. And so we'll naturally, be distracted by things. So I think you should set your time up where you are reviewing those calls. Let's say at the end of the day, you're spending, 30 minutes listening to 2 calls or something like that. And you can, of course, put them on 1.5x speed. I think it's still good to consume those calls that are already recorded, because you'll still get exposure to the words being used, the types of questions that they're asking, any platform experience that they're showing. But I'm a huge advocate for live calls, because if you then want to reach out to the salesperson again and say, hey, why did you ask this question? It's top of mind for them. They're probably leaving their notes. They want to follow up with them. So that is the thing that's top of mind. And so if you need to ask questions, then that opportunity is available for you. And again, like I said, that's going to help you develop a relationship with those people as well. So yeah, I would say live calls definitely outshine recorded calls most of the time.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think the one point you just mentioned, which is so important, is that it's a live opportunity and it's actually happening right now, which means it's your first moment to actually provide value to the sales rep and build that relationship. You're not building a relationship by watching recordings, right? And then the second point, which I think is also important, is you have this air cover of ignorance. That's like something which our managers at Hopin once told me, that when you're in a new role, you can just ask really dumb questions, and everybody will be like happy to explain them to you, because you're new, you're the new person in the company. Like, nobody, has expectations at you. And you can tell this to your clients as well. You can say like, hey, I'm new to this company. I'm curious, like, what are you trying to do with X? And so you can actually ask questions live as well that you wouldn't be able to ask when you are watching a recording. You would just like accept this recording as like how a sales call is done, and that's it, rather than injecting your own insights or questions into it.
Exactly.
We do have Russ, who joined us in the audience. So I just wanted to give him a quick shout out representing the UK. And then we have
Russ.
a great question as well. Since you highlighted the importance of building relationships with heads of departments, how do you handle execs who are skeptical of partnerships? I think somebody just listened to my scar tissue analogy. But really great.
I would put on your sales cap and get curious, and of course ask. You could say something as direct as, you seem hesitant about partnerships. Why is that? What has been your experience like? Because the last thing you want to do is just notice that and not take action on it, because that could be, your champion that you need to work with. And so asking them directly is going to uncover the challenges that they've had in the past. And then that can inform you of, okay, well, maybe that is more likely to be a challenge in this role. So that helps me prepare. So not only is it good for the relationship to address that with that person, but it will uncover valuable information for you. So I would honestly meet any skepticism with curiosity and questions, to level set expectations for yourself and hopefully move them in the direction towards partnerships as well. So if you're talking to an exec, I would say you should always come prepared with some statistics and at least a general plan that you're thinking of what you're going to do with partnerships and how it's going to impact the business, especially that executive specifically, because there's going to be some education that's required. And if they are skeptical, then that's going to be based on their experiences, and there's going to be data that may suggest otherwise. And so you're not going to combat them with that, obviously, but you can use that as an opportunity, again, to inform yourself of what this person cares about and what they're going to be expecting, which will, one, help you level set your expectations, be able to at least address their expectations. And then, of course, bring in your expertise, which you should feel very comfortable in doing, and bringing forward any kind of data that may be contrary. And so you're not going to, win them over immediately. But let's say you have a VP of sales who is skeptical, and you need to work with them, obviously, to generate revenue for the business, and you're probably going to be held accountable for it. You're going to ask them what do they expect from the partnerships department, and if they're skeptical, then they may have this idea that, who knows, maybe it's partnerships interfere with our existing sales and slow things down or something like that. And you can, of course, bring forward the data of, well, it actually increases, deal velocity, deal size, so on and so forth. So if you're able to understand what they think is bad about it, then that can help you build the case against their skepticism through actually doing the work. So you say, after a quarter goes by and you have some successes, then you can bring to that person, hey, you specifically were skeptical about this. This is what happened. So you're going to, chip away at their skepticism with the, of course, industry data to start, but then your own data as well moving forward. So in short, I would get curious about it, ask questions, have it be a piece of feedback for yourself to make sure you're understanding what's important to that person. And of course, try and educate them as much as possible, but not in a combative way.
Yeah. And I like your approach of like using data to convince people, right? Because the best way of convincing anybody is results. And I actually think a partnerships leader who is skeptical might be better than somebody who's just indifferent. Like they always say, like the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And so similarly, like somebody who hates partnerships because they had a bad experience in the past, they deeply care about this still, right? And so they are engaged. You can use your data to kind of convince them of the opposite. You can use your data to convince them that there is a way where partnerships can contribute to the company, versus somebody who's just indifferent and doesn't care about their job is like, that's the worst kind of exec you can meet, right?
Agreed. I think skepticism is beneficial, and I'm an advocate for all feedback is good feedback, even if it's hard to hear or critical. At least it is some feedback for what you're doing. So yeah, I completely agree. Indifference would be horrible to work with because you don't know what's what.
Yeah. And I see the chat lining up, so I just wanted to shout out quickly Olivia, who's joining us and finally figured out her phone. Glad you were able to type and share your feedback, that understanding the customer first is really important. We have Lincoln joining us also from the UK. The UK is representing hard with Shaheen as well. Thank you so much for watching today. And then Lincoln said, if you can't quantify, you can't qualify, which I definitely agree. But here we had Penelope, who just asked a really good question as well. Where should that data come from? Like you just started a new job. Like, do you use historical data or do you create your own data points, which takes time?
Yeah, so there's two different ways you can do it. One is industry data. So you can gather data from, shout out to nearbound.com. We share a lot of information. Canalys, of course, Jay McBain talks a lot about the different impacts that happen across definitely many industries. So you can get general industry data, and then you can of course look at the previous data in your company if it does exist as well. So if there's already an existing partnerships motion, then you can look at that data. And then also, if not, then I wouldn't do too much work to try and backtrack any data of partner engagements. If you can, you could search in Gong or, whatever tool you're using to see if there's any partner mentions on calls in the transcripts. That's a really good way to kind of backdate the data for impacts or potential impacts on opportunities. Again, that's going to be a little bit harder. But if there is an existing program internally, then you can at least reference, that historical data that hopefully that team was tracking. And if not, I would just fall back on industry data. There's a lot of compelling information that's out there. Actually, I usually reference this one article by Breezy, which I think is a referral tool, but breezy.com, if you search, it's like 100 plus partnerships, stats, or data points. They have many on there. They're always updating it, and they categorize it by like strategic partnerships, impact on marketing, impact on sales. And so that's a really good summary to just kind of pick and choose which data points you want for the conversations that you're entering into. Again, it's not a silver bullet because it's industry data, but it's going to be, at least new information for the person that you're speaking to, because they may not understand the full impact of partnerships. So yeah, I would say look out there in the ecosystem, the one reference I mentioned, and then of course, Jay McBain, nearbound.com. And if there's any internal data, then absolutely use that as well. And ask your peers. Maybe they have some data from similar companies that would be also useful to be a bit more specific and kind of like your own case study for partnerships.
Yeah, I like the approach of like gathering your internal historical data just for reference, but kind of like discounting that compared to like some of the industry benchmarks and also data you can generate yourself, right? Because partnerships might not have worked out at that company before. This might not be their first attempt, so you don't want to like associate yourself too much with like what happened before. But it's, and then again, very important to know why it failed in the past. Like if they had a partnership team before, in your first 90 days, you really want to figure out like what happened. So you talk with other team members and try to really get candid feedback on like what went wrong with previous partnerships, because you don't want to be associated with that. You don't want to fall into the same sinkholes where there might be internal politics or something like that.
Right. So cherry pick a little bit, but make sure that it's really just to inform that person in their role as well.
Yeah. We have another really good question from Russ here. And he said that his CRO is really about speed and closing revenue. And so when you're in the new company and you know that there's pipeline, how much of your time in the first 90 days do you focus on existing pipeline, even if it might be unqualified?
That's a good question, especially if it's your very first 90 days. If it's a net new program, I would say I probably wouldn't focus on trying to impact revenue within the first 90 days of a net new program, simply because you may have the situation where you bring in a partner on a deal, but then it like trips things up because you don't know the flow of business and the rhythm of business. You don't know the value. So bringing in a partner too soon, I think, would definitely do more harm than good. So if your CRO is very much so focused on speed and closing revenue, and they're expecting that in the first 90 days, hopefully you are doing your due diligence and asking about that before you get into the role, because I would say it's unrealistic, unless if it's a very transactional software. If it's a $10 a month software, then maybe it can make a little bit more sense. But if it's some enterprise level sale or multiple thousands of dollars, then that's definitely a little bit harder. So for an existing program, if you have partners already, then I think if you're looking to rebuild or enhance your program, it would be good to see what kind of opportunities you have and where partners are overlapping with that. Shameless plug to Reveal. There's actually some functions in account mapping softwares like Reveal that can do that, where it shows you of your open deals, here are the partners that are associated with those deals. And maybe they're partners that you haven't spoke to for a while that could re-engage them and help you with the rebuilding process. And I wouldn't, tap them in right away, but it could spark the conversation to say, hey, there is an opportunity to bring in the partner. Let me talk to them and let's figure out what the impact could be. Are we just sharing some intel on the account? Maybe that'll help speed the deal along. And what we talk about at Nearbound we actually have a resource for this, the Nearbound Sales Blueprint, where there are 3 different ways you can engage partners. You can, of course, gain introductions. You can gather intel on an account, or you can drive influence on an account. Intel and influence are really great ways to impact existing opportunities. So that could be as simple as an email thread with your partner asking, who was your decision maker when you made this purchase? What was the purchase process like? Was procurement long? Was legal long? So on and so forth. What's the status of the health? What's the health of the account right now? Are they in good health? Politically, are they okay? Are they doing layoffs? Like all that information your sales rep may not have asked about, but that could 100% impact the speed of the deal. So gathering that intel from partners, even if you are, in an existing program and you're trying to rebuild, that'll at least start the process of, okay, I'm helping my team with engaging with partners, but I'm also starting to navigate which partners are willing to share that information, have that information, and have their program set up appropriately as well. So I hope that answers the question, Russ. That's what I would do. I would definitely tap in the existing partners to at least give some intel on the account and track that as well, because then you can say to the CRO, hey, of the 20 deals that we have open right now, we actually have 10 that we can engage partners on. So let's go ask them for intel on the account or help them give us influence on the account, pass a note to the C-suite or whoever's the decision maker at the prospect account. And then track that and say, of those 10, 8 of them we got intel on, and here's what happened over the next 90 days. 50% of them closed faster or above our ACV. And that's where you can start tracking your own data as well. So to answer your question specifically, look at the partners that do have an opportunity with your existing opportunities, and then run a play with them. And it could be as simple as 3 questions on who's the decision maker, what was the procurement process like, and what's the health of the account on your end. That's more information than the sales rep likely had.
Definitely. I think that's such a good shout out and such a good use case for Reveal as well, as like qualifying that pipeline, right? Like going into an unqualified pipeline is never a good idea because you're just going to waste so much time trying to qualify manually, right? It's much easier to get them to plug in Reveal and that's it. I think though, like Russ, to answer your question as well, from my perspective, your team should expect you to have a ramp time. Like it's not realistic for you to like say, hey, you're going to be fully up to speed within 90 days and already closing deals, etc. Like you need to do this foundational work, and it will never ever happen again if you don't do it in the beginning. That's the biggest danger. Once you're like stuck in deals and actually closing deals with partners and enabling them and putting out fires, etc., you're never going to take the time to talk to everybody in the org, set those monthly meetings, make sure you join sales calls, etc., because everything else is more urgent. So in the beginning, you still have this like relative calm that you can actually go in and like really like lay the foundation for a full-on understanding of your company and your product and your customer base before you dive into the pipeline. And chances are that pipeline might have been sitting there for a long time, so one additional month is not going to hurt it either. But I would really fight for your rights to actually like settle into the role and do it well, versus like just spinning wheels and trying to ride a bike that you haven't really fully built yet.
My last comment is, if it is unqualified or the deal is not as good of an opportunity, making it qualified and pushing it through to go over the finish line will be good for sales numbers, but it might not be the best thing for the client as well. And ultimately, that's what matters most.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. It's a great way to build relationships internally and influence bidirectionally as well. We are coming up on time, but I wanted to take one more question. And then if you have additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat anyways. And then Will and I will go in and like answer them in the LinkedIn comments as well. But here we have Sumitra as well, joining us from London as well, so UK representing. Thank you for spending your Friday evening with us. We really appreciate it. If you're considering to build a new partnerships program from scratch, how do you set expectations and actually start taking up revenue targets? And then the second half of that question is, how do you convince partners and set expectations with them? So I think it's a lot about expectation setting internally and externally when you have a new program.
Yeah, I would say if your tool or what you're selling is cheaper, then sooner is what you can think about. I always reference 6 to 18 months after a partner program starts. That's generally when you can start expecting revenue. That's a really big spread. But, if it's, again, a transactional tool where it's 10, 20, $50 a month, that is a little bit easier to get volume going and have revenue being produced because the sales cycle is likely smaller or shorter. And of course, if it's a longer sales cycle, then you should forecast out a bit further. So I would say if you're building from scratch, 6 months minimum is when revenue should start being produced, depending again on the type of tool that you're selling. And that's when you can start thinking about the hard revenue targets. Now, what I would focus on from months, let's say it's a more transactional tool, we're starting at 6 months for the hard revenue targets. From months 3 to 6, I would focus on pipeline because that's going to, of course, impact that revenue target. But if you are able to run some marketing programs with your partners, which around that time frame you should be able to, then that'll build some pipeline. And so from a closed one revenue perspective, that's when the 6 to 18 months I think would apply. But you want to have data at your fingertips as soon as possible. So understanding number of leads generated, even the higher level marketing metrics from working with partners. When we work with this partner, do we gain more social followers? Do we get more clicks? Or is the web traffic increasing? Understanding that is going to help you navigate which partners should I actually work with from month 6 onwards. And so that's where you should think, okay, I may not have a target now, a hard revenue target, but I will eventually. So how can I get ahead of that? And, at the end of the day, although you'll be held accountable for one specific metric, a lot of the other metrics are going to matter as well. So setting up any kind of tracking and attribution early is going to really help you out for delivering success further in the program.
Yeah, tracking is going to be so important. So getting that right early is crucial. I think the other thing which is really important to focus on, and this is something which Marco de Paulus, one of my first podcast guests, actually talked about quite a bit, is focusing on inputs rather than outputs, right? Because you're kind of like shooting in the dark with a new program. You don't know how many leads you can realistically convert. You don't know how much revenue you can really generate. And so revenue is an output, which you don't really have a lot of control over at this point because you don't really understand your funnel yet with partners. But then the inputs are like, how many partners are you talking to? How many partners are signing up to your program? How many leads are they sending you? And so forth. And those are things which you can very much control. Like those are things which you have like a lot more control over than necessarily revenue. And so if your leadership is open to the idea and like understands that new programs takes time, I would highly recommend you to focus on inputs first and then later transition to outputs once you actually like fully charted out the funnel. Like once you start generating revenue, you can get a much better grip on like, okay, I know how much revenue I can get per partner, which means this is the amount of partners I need to put into my program, and then work backwards to a revenue number that you're comfortable with in the future.
Yeah, the other note that I would mention quickly is there's this idea, I think it's called incrementality in marketing. It's basically like we did this thing on this day and we spent this much, or, we worked with this partner and here's what happened for, the other marketing metrics that we did. Or that we're looking at rather. And so you're able to identify not directly that this partner sent this much traffic, but we did this thing on this day and the shelf life of it, let's say it's on social, is whatever, a week. So let's look at those metrics over a week. That'll again continue to inform you of when we do this, this happens, and it's correlation, yes, but I was just thinking about like correlation is not causation, but it's still at least some indicator that you don't have yet. So I would use it. To answer your second question, externally, how do you convince partners and set realistic expectations? I think the main thing is be straight up with them, be very forward. Is your program, not ready yet? Say that to them, because some partners may be willing to raise their hand and help you build the program because they want to be your number one partner. because they're really, they really believe in your company, or they're really excited to partner. And so even though it might not be ready, they might be okay with that. So if you communicate that, that's going to be the best thing. And you also will be respecting your partner and their time by saying, we're not ready yet. So, give them some expectation of when you can talk again. So you basically don't want to burn the bridge by saying, yeah, of course we can partner, and then get them signed up and nothing happens. And then they go, oh, this partnership sucks. And then, 4 months down the line, when you are ready, you say, okay, let's partner now. They're going to probably have moved on because any excitement or initial momentum is probably lost. So you respect your partner and yourself by communicating realistically, we're not ready, but of course, always aim to try and include them in the future. And so if you think you'll be ready in 3 months, tell them that. So yeah, my main thing is, be straight up, be very direct, be forward, and they'll appreciate that as well, because they'll kind of like contain their excitement until that time.
Yeah, partnerships is all about timing. And so if you start executing when you're not ready, it's going to backfire. So it's really important to make sure that you are transparent with the other side, and then maybe pick things up later. I know we're at time, Will, and I appreciate you spending the last 40 minutes with us. And we have so many questions in the chat, like where can I get, for example, a link to Reveal? If you want to quickly answer that one, or we can drop it in the comments underneath as well.
Yeah, reveal.co. Reveal.co. That's the best place to go. And you can, of course, hit me up. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a user of the platform, which is one of the benefits of me working here. So I'm trying to be the subject matter expert. So feel free to hit me up. And also, yes, we'll definitely drop in the comments any answers as well.
Nice. And if we had to summarize this session with just 1 or 2 sentences on what's important in your first 90 days in a new partnerships role, what would it be?
Become 70% proficient in all things related to your business, and develop relationships with the key stakeholders in the business early by asking them what is important to them, what they're held accountable for, trying to educate them on partnerships, and of course, making the firm, direct statement of, I'm going to help you achieve that with partnerships, so that you get all of the relationships you need in the right position right from the start.
That's awesome. Such a great way to close the session. Will, I really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing with us your tips on the first 90 days in partnerships. And I also want to give a shout out to people who joined us today in the audience: Sumitra, Russell, Mary, Lincoln, Penelope, Sahin, Olivia, LinkedIn user. I really appreciate you all taking the time to join us here today, because you could have been anywhere else and you spent it with us, and that means the world to me. Thanks so much, everybody. And we will be back in February after a short break on my end. But in February, we'll follow up with new episodes of the partnerships. So stay tuned. See you then.
See ya.